Beginning in 1883 until 1929, American businessman Andrew Carnegie, founder of Carnegie Steel, decided to invest his wealth back into the public. Thus, the Carnegie Library was born. Join me as I travel the world visiting, photographing, and experiencing all of the still-standing operational libraries and the towns they inhabit. I didn't know shit about Carnegie libraries. This all started because I was trying to find something to do in Minnesota. I came across the Detroit Lakes Public Library, which was listed as a landmark, but we'll get there. Andrew Carnegie was a steel tycoon who became one of the nation's first billionaires, but not without controversy, specifically for what he did during the Homestead Strike, where he approved or allegedly approved the use of Pinkertons and the fucking militia to bust the strikers. But I digress. As I understand, Carnegie had a come-to-Jesus moment after he sold his company and decided to give away 90% of his wealth to charities, foundations, and public works. He became a pioneering philanthropist. He favored the estate tax and supported progressive taxation, and apparently favored unions. See, he believed the rich should use their wealth to better society. This is probably because Carnegie was a rags to riches story, growing up poor and educating himself. Which brings us to the libraries. Carnegie saw libraries as a poor man's college. When he was young, he would borrow books from Colonel James Anderson's personal library, and eventually taught himself a trade profession. He believed knowledge was a necessity, that knowledge for working boys would improve them, and that books should not be an entitlement exclusively to the rich. Back in those days, many libraries were subscription-based, but Carnegie wanted a literal free-for-all. His libraries would be the thesis of his meritocratic belief. My journey began in my own backyard, kinda, where my mom grew up, the Illinois Valley. Before the coal and zinc industry boom of the 1930s, the valley was home to many native tribes. Our biggest event from those days was in the 1780s, when the Ottawa and the Potawatomi avenged the death of their chief, Pontiac, by besieging the Illiniwek until the last one starved to death. Allegedly. Hence where we get the name Starved Rock. In the 1800s, the valley was a manufacturing powerhouse for corn, nickel, coal, zinc, and beer? The fertile lands that once drew farmers in the area was slowly ravaged by mining, agriculture, and hydraulic fracking. LaSalle, named after a French explorer so incompetent his own men killed him and buried him in a pauper's grave, became a major river port along the Canal, and even had a population that competed with Chicago. By the 1800s, American zinc was the valley. The Canal, M&H Zinc, they all supercharged the population. Westclox opened in 1885, Starved Rock was drawing in thousands upon thousands of tourists every year, and mines were popping up like weeds. Shit was riding high. Until the mines closed in the 20s, and Prohibition killed the breweries and gave birth to the mob. Rail and river traffic declined, Route 251 bypassed many main streets, and by the 1970s, manufacturing was outsourced, killing the population. M&H Zinc closed in the 70s, but Karis Chemical rose in the wake of its collapse. The valley has been in a death spiral ever since. Towns like Ottawa, Marseilles, Seneca, Depew, and Utica are crusty shells of their former splendor. The valley was once the epicenter of philanthropy, education, and innovation, now economically and socially stunted. All that reform torn down by xenophobia and racism, poverty around every corner. Healthcare is so poor, as one person said to me, I'd rather get a toe cut off in Chicago than a foot sawn off in Peru. So I grabbed my camera, held my nose like a pussy, and jumped right in. My first stop was my mom's hometown of Marseilles, or Martucky as it's often called. Why Martucky? Because the shit you find here you can only find in Marseilles or Kentucky. A crashed airplane marks the valley threshold. Once you cross it, reality evaporates. There's no turning back now. The valley has you. Marseilles is like any other backwater town, the deep red, where Confederate flags are abundantly flown. On Sunday morning, the churches are stocked, and by Sunday night, the bars are packed. Like many valley towns, Marseilles isn't concerned with historical preservation. For years, an old teddy bear was used to plug a hole in a storefront window. Don't even get me started on the traveling shit-stained mattress. My mom's parents owned a gas station a few blocks down from the library. In 1904, the city appointed a library board of directors. The citizens raised money, and together with a $10,000 donation from Carnegie, a library was built. It opened in 1905. The initial book count was 700. And then by the end of the first year, that number jumped to 1,600 volumes. The library is quaint and beautiful. The tile in the vestibule resembled a Roman bath, and the floors creaked when I walked through. The first librarian was L.L. Fuller. I wish I knew them. There was a woman in the back playing Minecraft, and a portrait of Carnegie looked after her. An annex opened in 1939, and though the outside was repainted, the shelves and file cabinets were all original. Sort of. Generously provided by the Remington Rand Library Bureau after 1927. The dedication plaque reads, "Great is the gift that bringeth knowledge." Marseilles is empty and barren. You can smell the Illinois River from Main Street. On a Tuesday afternoon, there is little to do. I popped into an antique store and was left completely alone by the owner, who tentatively watched the January 6th committee hearings. I recalled what my cousin said before he passed away. Will I ever get out of this place? Probably not. The next stop was LaSalle, home of the Hegler Karras Mansion. But that is a long story for another rainy day. Since it was the center point along the canal between St. Louis and Chicago, LaSalle boomed as a transshipment point for boats, barges, and ferries. In its heyday, LaSalle was an actual city. Just imagine this. Trolleys, buses, stores, and hotels everywhere. Shipments of molasses, sugar, coffee, fresh oranges, and lemons every day on the docks. Steamboats and paddle boats everywhere all the time. Canal boats brought in lumber, stoves, wagons, corn, and wheat. LaSalle was surging. In 1858, it was known as Zinc City, with companies like the LaSalle Coal Mining Company and M&H Zinc dominating the area. The latter was founded by Frederick Matheson and Edward Hegler. These two men turned LaSalle from a busy port town into a proper metropolis. Matheson, properly pronounced Mathiasen, invested in rebuilding the sewer systems. He established the electric light plant, built new roads and bridges, built a new high school, and founded the Hygienic Institute. The dude even founded Westclox and the LaSalle Machine and Tool Company. He was a fucking beast. Hegler, on the other hand, founded the Open Court, one of the first academic journals in the country that streamlined the topics of science, religion, and philosophy for the general public. When his son-in-law Paul Karras took over, Open Court became famous for introducing Eastern religions to the Western world, which is why LaSalle became known as Buddhism's gateway to the West. The 1930s saw a sharp increase of saloons and casinos, earning LaSalle the nickname Little Reno. The streets were packed and lined with gold. The hotels were always filled. The docks were overcrowded. Businesses flourished. Chaos and madness at all hours and around every corner. The Irish mob attacking a bar one night and the grand opening of a department store the next. It's impossible to imagine this frenzy. Then, by the 1970s, it was all gone. Today, LaSalle is empty. The trolley tracks are long gone. All the hotels are closed, shuttered, and abandoned. And the only factory left is Karis Chemical. Most of the historical buildings are unoccupied and falling apart. The only thing left from those days that's still open is the canal boat and the Hagler-Karis mansion. Faint glimpses of a once dazzling past. And all that philanthropic work, all that investment money and education, squandered on a town that refuses to pull itself back up, like Ottawa. The LaSalle of yesteryear is a long faded memory. Did it even exist? Or was it just a mirage? An industrialist's fever dream? The library began in 1885 after fundraising efforts established a sort of literary club in a rented room inside the mercantile store. In 1889, Mathiasen bought and remodeled a larger room with 1,245 volumes. The subscription fee was $1 a year. Then in 1905, with a $4,250 land acquisition and a $25,000 grant from Carnegie, LaSalle finally acquired a free public library. It was designed by Victor Madison. Frederick Matheson, Victor Madison, Richard Matheson? What the hell? Anyway, Victor Madison designed Westclox and the new Italian Renaissance Library. It opened in 1907 with 3,364 volumes. When I visited, the librarians were so nice. They gave me a DVD of the library's history to watch in the preschool room. It was a bit awkward. The original 1907 catalog included lots of feminist literature, as well as Girls Who Become Famous, Little Women, Bancroft's History of America, and lots of smut and sex. I'm, of course, joking. Just lots of romance. In 1911, they installed their first fan, and they almost closed because of the Spanish flu and COVID. This small library endured 2 world wars and 2 pandemics, and it's still kicking. Incredible. By the 1950s, there were 16,000 volumes. In 2019, there were well over 65,000 books. The library still stands today, but don't be a shitter like me and confuse the 2007 edition with the original entrance. All the shelves and tables in the original wing are from when it opened. There's a Westclox exhibit on one side and the genealogy department on the other. A portrait of Lord and Savior Carnegie hangs above the original fireplace. And if you can believe, there was once a puke-ugly shag carpet and a rickety spiral staircase that dangled in the entrance. As I walked out and looked around at all the once prominent buildings, now grim and stark like a field of tombstones, I recalled what Reverend Albert Jordan wrote in 1905 when he appealed to Carnegie. "No doubt, I am one among thousands appealing to you for aid, and yet I ask you to bear with me while I try to state some of the conditions in this town with reference to the very dire need of library facilities." Later clarifying, further grammar school education is greatly restricted. The last things I saw before leaving was an upside-down American flag and a wooden sign with hand-cut wooden letters that read, "China owns Biden." Mathiasen's home, which he generously donated to the city for public use, was callously demolished to build a fucking baseball diamond. Peru is weird. They're locked in some kind of a blood feud with LaSalle because they refuse to be annexed. Anyway, the town is still thriving. Lots of traffic and gorgeous refurbished storefronts. But the waterfront district is marred by old, deteriorated buildings. I suppose it's hard thriving in the shadow of your big sister. Without getting into politics, Peru is its own city, but resides on the coattails of LaSalle. It's bustling for an evening sprawl, but the faint imprints of a once thriving city can be seen just beneath the surface. Geez, what happened? I found very little information about the library. The original fee-based library was established in 1886, and later the city was awarded a $15,000 grant by Carnegie. The free public library opened in 1911 with an initial catalog of 2,000 books. In 1986, the library moved to its current building, leaving the original derelict. In a sad state of disrepair, walled in by untrimmed trees and weeds. God, seriously, what happened? I washed the awful taste of Peru down with some of that fine American coal runoff. Spring Valley was a coal mining town, established as a sort of cold metropolis where railroad and mining barons idled by the dozen. It was a boom town dubbed Magic City. In fact, officials planned for Spring Valley to be the next great city like Chicago, which is why the streets are laid out the way they are, to accommodate the traffic that never came. It was all a pipe dream. Spring Valley became known for large-scale strikes by Italian miners. In 1895, companies hired several African Americans to break up the strikes, and in retaliation, East European workers raided and destroyed those communities in a series of violent and deadly race riots. By the mid-century, Spring Valley became a sundown town. It was in this turbulent cyclone that the original library was founded in, carefully and neatly tucked away in a meeting room inside City Hall, safe from the storm. Carnegie donated $15,000 in 1912 for a new library, and it opened the following year in 1913. Today it's mostly renovated with a modern interior. I walked in and was immediately greeted with, "Are you here to get rid of our ghost?" Yeah, the Spring Valley Carnegie is haunted, or so the librarian insisted. But it didn't stop her from giving me a tour. A new addition was added in the 2000s. I was given the opportunity to parse through the construction photos. One of the other librarians admitted she was afraid the new addition wouldn't match the original building, but it was designed to look exactly the same. Kudos to the library board for that one. The librarians even recommended 2 books to help me on this journey: The Carnegie Library in Illinois and Free to All. I donated 3 boxes of mineralogy books I had in my car for weeks, and gave the library a firm pat on the columns when I left. Spring Valley is a sleepy town. The evening was settling. The last car drove down Main Street and yelled, "Nice hat, faggot," at me. And Verrucci's, the best goddamn Italian you'll have in the valley, was warming up for the dinner rush. The former retired manager approached me at the bar, and with a drunk twinkle in his eye, he recommended the stuffed shells, old family recipe, and it was fucking delicious. Verrucci's was one of the stops on the Winter Dance Party Tour in 1959. Valens, Holly, and the Big Bopper never made it to Spring Valley, but the town endured. This quaint little crib with a dark history. So a little pretext for this section. My obsession with Carnegie libraries started with the Minnesota library in Detroit Lakes. But my obsession with libraries and bookstores, specifically like old independent bookstores, started with the Waxwing Books, which was actually in the Chillicothe Public Library building, the old one. Waxwing Books was owned and operated by a man named Richard. He lived there. He lived in the basement of the library. And for about a year, up until he left in 2022, he had been there since 2005, I had probably been frequenting the library or the bookstore for about a year up until that point. And in that year, he sold me a lot of good books, many of them that you can see here. But he also gave me a tour of the library itself. He showed me his little den downstairs. He walked me through all the original old shelving that was on all the walls, the original woodwork on the banisters for the stairs that went down in the basement. He told me the history of the library and all that stuff. I wish I had it. But unfortunately, he was a COVID casualty. He eventually had to pack up stakes and he moved up to Rockford with his wife. And when he moved, he took with him about, I'd say, 1/8 of his entire, stock of books. In that week that he had to leave, everything had to go, so he was just giving books away. Not a lot of people came. So that meant that there was all this shelving that he told me, all these beautiful oak shelves that he told me, they are going to be stripped out and repurposed for furniture in the in the bed and breakfast, which was going to be moving in. And on top of that, all of the books that was that was left over, they would all be thrown out. So at first I'm like, well, I don't know anything about the books yet. I want the shelves. So I bought those shelves. I gave Richard $300 cash and said I would like half a corner piece, a piece from the circulation desk, including the librarian's swing door, that little door that they walk through, and a piece of the larger shelf that was on the other side of the vestibule. So I bought all that stuff. And so I went in with my mom and her boyfriend, hammer and everything, and we pried and dismantled all the shelves that I bought so that they could be rebuilt back at my mom's house. And that's what all of this is. We took them down piece by piece and rebuilt them piece by piece. That's what this is. These are old library shelves. And this section here, not this back section, but this section here is half of that corner piece. So there's like a divot over here where the corners would fit. And if you look up, you will actually see where the name tags or the nameplates would be. Now, that wasn't enough. I would love the shelves. I'm so happy I got the shelves, but then there was the problem with the books. The books I could not stand seeing get thrown out. And I'm not talking about the mass paperback books that you can get anywhere. Like a lot of these are like mass paperbacks. I'm talking about the old books. There was genealogy books, there was mineralogy books, there was books on birds, books on history, there was books on shipbuilding, ship rigging, guns, wrenches, there was mechanic guides, there was almanacs, and these all ranged from 1850 till about 1960. Nobody wanted them. So again, I came back with my mom and her boyfriend Walter, and we filled up about 5 to 6 SUVs worth of books. And when I was done, I drove them all the way up to Davenport, and that's where I donated them to a local bookstore. So I did rescue those books. I got a section of original Carnegie library bookshelves, and I'm so happy. Carnegie granted the town $10,000 to build a library in 1915, and it finally opened in 1917. It was in use until 2005, when Richard bought it and turned it into Waxwing Books. It's worth noting that Carnegie wanted his name off the libraries he funded, so nice one, Chillicothe. Chillicothe, or just Chili, is still a boppin' town thanks to river and railroad traffic. Downtown looks brand new as it did in the 1890s. To their credit, Chillicothe is trying very hard to pick themselves out of the economic pit. Do they have enough appeal? Well, you tell me. Go and visit. One thing is clear. I still want more of those shelves. Next up, El Paso, Illinois. It's a small community with a relatively uneventful history in agriculture. Their biggest celebrity was hybrid corn baron Lester Pfister. Pfister. Otherwise, El Paso is just El Paso. The original library was in the back room of a store, but it burned down in 1894. Carnegie swooped in with a $6,000 grant in 1905, and after a few years, this castle of literature opened in 1907. By the way, that's Richardsonian Romanesque, designed by Paul O. Moratz. And when it opened, 1,300 books were donated by the Ladies' Library Association, plus 500 new books, provided generously by funds from the community. The original wing is now a museum dedicated to local history and famous residents, or rather rich families that transformed El Paso into an agricultural powerhouse. The floors creaked and moaned as I walked through, the old library welcoming me into its warm, open arms. I ran my hands along the original wood shelves and card catalogs, absorbing all that warm, humbling comfort. There were stereographs of the library in its prime, and beautiful images of an El Paso long since faded. A small section of books from the original catalog is kept near the door, and the whole place smelled like old paper. I sat by the original fireplace to relish the milieu, and to jot down these notes. All the while looming over me was a portrait of the man himself. When I was younger, I spent the summer in El Paso helping a family member. Back then, it felt like an even smaller town, if you could believe it. The main drag was less than a quarter-mile long. There were barely any houses. Now, El Paso is overrun with suburban development, and the interstate traffic helps keep the small businesses afloat. I suppose it's a perfect place to isolate in, to get away from the city, enjoy a really big meal at Woody's, and enjoy the slow, small-town life. The area known as Streator was once the site of the Illiniwek traders, the last remnants of the Mississippian culture. But once homesteaders poured in the 1830s, the area took a sharp turn into coal country. Coal barons were everywhere looking to turn a profit, Many of them were opportunists, and if you threw a brick into Main Street on a busy day, you were bound to hit one. One such baron, worthy Streator, established the first successful mining operation in the 1860s. What was then called Unionville changed its name to Streator in honor of its paterfamilias. Streator would become a capitalist hotbed. Coal was needed to fuel Chicago. East Coast capitalists came out to stake their cut of the pie. Glass, brick, and tile making skyrocketed. Miners were chewing up land left and right for their homes and families. In 3 years, the population tripled from 1,700 people in 1870. As one historian put it in 1875, churches, schoolhouses, large substantial business houses, and handsome residences with elegant grounds and surroundings now beautify the waste of 10 years ago. Then, it was all gone. The last mine shut down in the late 50s. What was a population of 17,000 people in 1960 fell to 12,500 in 2020. Most of the industrial buildings from those days are gone, and Streator is now more or less still a railroad town. But the library, this cathedral of knowledge, still stands from those prosperous days. Walking up to it, I felt like I was entering the Parthenon. Colonel Ralph Plum, one of those local millionaires turned politicians, was a personal friend of Carnegie. Thus, Streator would become the recipient of one of the largest grants to be given through the program, a whopping $35,000. It opened in 1903, the year Plum died. The director was so nice and eager to talk about the library's history, she gave me a personal tour. Looking up into the dome, you can see the original light bulbs that span the oculus. And the beautiful original 1905 Fuchs murals. You'd never know it, but this whole section, including the columns, had to be restored from damage sustained by a basement fire. I screamed when I saw the original oak fireplaces, and I screamed even louder when I saw the original Globe Wernicke barrister shelves with their leaded glass tops. They even had original file cabinets and card catalogs from the Library Bureau. The board was going to give all this shit away, but the director stepped in and said, "No, you're not doing that. I run the library. I make the decisions." Now, the original furniture is still in use, or in the case of the card catalogs, repurposed as end tables. Non-destructively, of course. The break room still has its original one wooden stall/bathroom that works. And the upstairs. Oh, the upstairs. Like walking through a museum. The reading room with its original wood barley twist tables is adorned with local heritage. Two rifles used in the Civil War by a local Union officer. The flag he recovered from the battlefield, still stained with his blood. And a brief history of his regiment, the 53rd Illinois Infantry. Even the frames and gun cases were locally made using spare wood they found in the basement. Back downstairs, in the children's section, I was told about IRL Minecraft, where kids could, quote, mine for books about stones and geology. A bit cringe, but I dig it. In this section, it was decided very early on to replace all the grim and threatening paintings from the original library with something more welcoming and kid-friendly. Before I left, I was invited to their murder mystery, and I bought a couple Stephen King books. The whole experience blindsided me. I felt nauseous. I was so happy and excited I was going to throw up. See, growing up from the perspective of Marseilles, Streator always felt like it was in another state. It had this reputation of being off the maps, this mysterious place somewhere far beyond the horizon, an eerie glow in the sky I could never reach. And it really wasn't. But that's how the valley makes you feel, alone and disconnected. So one of my favorite books in the series of unfortunate events is actually Urset's Elevator, and my favorite part of the book actually is this, and it's just how descriptive it is. It's this. I want to conclude this segment with something that kind of happened to me while I was in Streator. I had never been to Streator at all, up until the point where I came to photograph the library. And while I was walking around downtown, I saw a guy coming at me from across the street. He was on a bicycle. Well, he was walking the bicycle, but he came up to me, and he was very aggressive when he told me, "I know you." And I'm like, I don't think you do. And he's like, "No, I know you." And I said, "No, I don't think you do." He's like, "Yes, you were here photographing me with that camera, Nikon, me in the alley picking up garbage." And I said, "I never did that. I never saw you. This is my first time in Streator. I don't know what you're talking about." And he kept on insisting that I was the person. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to engage this guy. I walked across the street. I told him, "Okay, whatever you say, I didn't, but I'm not going to take a picture of you." So I started to walk down, back down Main Street, and he was following me. Now, Main Street was pretty barren, as you can tell by the pictures, but a block over from Main Street was a park that had a carnival and everything. Well, he kept on following me, and so I was getting uncomfortable. So I turned down a street toward the park where I knew it'd be more public, there'd be more people and everything. So I saw the theater, this beautiful Art Deco theater, which you had just seen, and that's when he started to scream and yell at me about taking pictures of other people. He started swearing at me. He started saying stuff like, "See, I knew you were fucking taking pictures. I knew you were taking fucking pictures of other people." And that's when he started to say, he said these words exactly: "If you take any pictures of me ever again, you're going to find yourself in a fucking box. I'm going to bury you." And then I'm like, okay, threat. Okay, got it. And so I start walking toward a police car that I saw parked out for the carnival. And I started walking. He keeps following me, by the way. And I knock on the window of the police car. I tell the police officer what's going on. He is still behind me. He actually walks up to us, and he starts getting all huffy and puffy and everything like that. The police comes out, and he says, "Okay, what's happening? What's going on?" I say my side of the story. He says his side of the story. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense. And that's when the police officer tells me that, "Look, we don't want any trouble, okay? People are just enjoying themselves. They're having a good time at the carnival. I don't think you should take pictures. If you're going to be downtown, you can be downtown, but we don't want any trouble. We don't want to stir anything up. Just avoid taking pictures." And it's like, I'm on public property. That's the public's street. I can take pictures of buildings if I want to. I can take pictures in that park because it's a public park. That's infringing on my constitutional rights. And rather than tell the guy who is still screaming at me about swearing at me and everything, rather than telling him to stop, the police officer tells me to stop taking pictures. And that's when the guy looks at me, and he reaches across the police officer to push me. And he says, "If I ever see you in this town again, I'm going to fucking hang you." By the way, before that, when he was verbally assaulting me before I came up to the police officer, he said, "We used to hang niggers like you from the trees out here." Now, after that push, the police officer just told the guy, "Man, go home. Just stay out. Stay home. Go back. Don't bother him." Didn't arrest him. Didn't do anything. Didn't fine him. Nothing. Just said, go back. And so the police officer looks to me and says, you want me to write this up? And I'm like, yes, write it up, please. And so he wrote the report up. I wrote my story, and I specifically said in the where you write down what happened from your point of view, I made extra sure to tell them that the police officer did nothing. That the police officer told me to stop doing something that I'm constitutionally allowed to do. And that's when the police officer was like, do you want me to drive you back to your car? I said yes, because I don't know where that guy is. He drove me back to the car, and I was parked by the library, and that was that. But that is a perfect encapsulation of what the Valley is like. That's what these towns are now. And it's a sad state of affairs, but yeah, that's basically Streator in a nutshell. The last stop on this gloomy tour of the hollowed-out American Midwest was Peoria, the closest thing to an actual city in the valley. It was a major port and agricultural boomtown back in the day, and the leading supplier for American whiskey. Today, manufacturing and canal traffic still play a vital component in the city's well-being, but that's not what Peoria is known for. Peoria became a joke, a metaphor that originated in vaudeville. See, Peoria in those days was seen as a prototypical American city, or as one put it, a dull, banal, and provincial theatrical road stop for traveling vaudeville acts. This gave way to the phrase, "Will it play in Peoria?" Meaning, is the show's demographic broad enough? Peoria's Midwestern demographics were commonly perceived as mainstream culture, the leading test market. So, if it plays in Peoria, then it has good taste. Peoria is steeped in rich theatrical history, specifically in regards to the Madison Theater. But fuck all that noise, I'm here for the library. The first libraries in Peoria were two subscription libraries in 1855 by two opposing religious groups. Eventually, through a series of clerical shenanigans, they merged with a book catalog numbering 1,500 books. The first public library would be housed in rented quarters. In 1909, Carnegie granted the city $20,000 for a public library. It would be designed in neoclassical by Hodgkins and Harris. The interior would be trimmed in oak, and it opened on June 16, 1911. It was situated in the working man's district. The library director was wonderful. She escorted me into the original wing, and I soon found myself standing breathless in the atrium. Everything, the chairs, the columns, the shelves, the mantel, they shimmered in bright oak wood. It was impossible to resist running my fingers up and down the original woodwork. I sat by the original fireplace to write my notes, breathing in the air and smiling. It was getting late, and I had to leave. I was driving back home, a sharp arrow coasting along the nation's breadbasket, kicking up gravel and leaving a trail of dust in the evening air. I was flanked by fields of golden crop. In the distance, menacing black combines and steel harvesters churning up the soil, hurling clouds of soot and crop dust into the thick orange sky. The history of the valley is the history of rural America, for better or worse. So many towns and cities fell for that industrialist dream, to be that Paris of the prairie, the next Chicago. Everybody wanted to be the next Vanderbilt or Carnegie, and hell, some cities became that promised land, but they didn't last. They followed those dreamers right into the ditch. It was the old American dream, the Gilded Age curse. When manufacturing left in the 60s, these cities were the first to feel the death tremors of proto-Americana. In another 20 years, nothing would be left. But they tried. God damn it, they tried. Main streets are still lined with those fiery red brick buildings and turn-of-the-century storefronts. But the luster, the occupancy, has long worn off. No amount of paint can bring back that sprawl. Now, everyone has a sort of it-is-what-it-is attitude. It's impossible to go line by line, town by town, and discuss each city's history. And that's the point. Why is there so much intolerance in these small towns? Well, among other things, because they are so disconnected from the rest of us. But at one time, that wasn't the case. These libraries were once the bastions of free education, news, community spirit, and free thinking. They were the beating hearts of these towns, the pillars of intellect. And I suppose they still are, to some degree. Though, I had an eerie feeling that the valley had just set an awful precedence of what to expect on this journey, this obsession, this crusade of mine, this blood-written manifesto that has consumed my life. Join me next time as I perilously stab my way through the worst fucking state in the Union to visit an old friend and visit all the Carnegies in the palm of the mitt. It's pure Michigan, and there's plenty of pure to choke down.